Hello, I'm Ismael Ariano, and I will be teaching these courses. This specific course is on physical security. This is one of many modules that cover an abundance of information as it pertains to performing your physical security audit. You will read here about my background as far as just highlights of my certifications and training, and uh, I hope you enjoy this course that I put together for you. In this module, I will demonstrate um, specific information when it comes to identifying what is your personal property and how design of the property supports the identification and what are the best practices in property identification. This is one component of many components that will complement each other all the way through a series of um, modules that will help you perform your own physical security audit. So, around the world, there's a lot of terms with reference to protected space, and most times they're talking about space that's being protected for wildlife or some type of environmental concern, but the space that you're in or the space that you're performing this audit on is also protected space. You want to protect that space in order to prevent any further damage, uh, reduce any, or mitigate any issues with reference to um, liability, and also you want to, especially if you're dealing with a community or a private uh, residence or business, you want to make sure that all the belongings and the property that are within that envelope are secure. So we'll talk about location, the specific location where the property is, who the owner is, if it has any easements. Easements are a big deal, so we'll be talking about that. Jurisdictions, as far as the jurisdiction the property may be in, types of property lines, access, agreements that you may have with other owners, and signs and placarding, which are very important. And as far as your visitors, who do you expect to be visiting your property or the property that you intend on performing this physical security audit? So let's talk a little about situs or the location. Situs is kind of like the legal term when it comes to location. That's a big deal. If you have a piece of property, for instance, your property is in a place that has been commonly known as a public area, or it's within the curtilage or falls within the envelope of public areas, there may be some situations, especially depending on your jurisdiction, where yes, it's your property, but it is known that people can, enter or be around the property. So knowing this stuff, as far as knowing where your property is and identifying, what's written in your laws, your local laws, when it comes to the deed of trust, um, as far as the any kind of legal documentation with reference to that property is very important. It's very important to know exactly what is your property and what property is actually being audited. So when you perform this audit, you should have real estate documentation in order to um, provide definitions with reference to, where the property is and what is the definition of that property. And so this will help you develop a better audit and a better physical security plan. So ownership kind of falls within the same realm of knowing who the owner of the property is, but not only knowing the owner of the property of your property, but knowing the owners of your neighbors' properties. Okay, because you always have to consider the tenants or those who are um, on the boundaries of your property. So when you do physical security installations or audits or any kind of implementations, that you have in mind, like for instance, a good example is lighting. Put lighting on, and the light is so many lux or so powerful that now it's starting to light up the areas of where your tenants or the your neighbors are at. um, you have to keep in mind that maybe that's something they don't want. So those will require some conversations with your neighbors, with the other property owners, in order to see what is, something that they're accepting to. Now, you can do a lot of things on your property and not mind what happens with the other owners, but keep this in mind. If you want to be a good neighbor and you want to have a good relationship, a long-term relationship, it's always good to share some of the things that you're going to do that might affect them. So then that way it mitigates or removes any friction or any type of negativity where all that stuff can be kind of worked out in conversation. So as we're talking about the your neighbors, and you're talking about other owners that are on the properties next to, behind, in front of your property, right? We have to look at easements. Easements don't always necessarily have to be in writing, but in most times there's a document that says that there is an easement, and the easement's either through your property or their property. Um, Most recently, I was in the state of Texas, where there seems to be a lot of um, checkerboarding on properties, and times there are people that use easements as a weapon, and don't want to allow people to their property because they want to exploit that easement, or exploit some of those rights. You have to do research. Make certain that if you do have easements on your property, that you're aware of it and you know what the rules are. And also, if there's easements that go to your property, um, that you're aware that what the rules are when it pertains to those easements, and what are the expectations. And so I'm back to having good neighbors. In my most recent experience, I spoke to the property owners, and they said no, that there is an easement. They allow property owners to enter through their property, and how it was explained to me that that road was a known road that was well traveled through the years, and it was like a state road or something. But you, every once in a while, you come across people that misinform you and put you in a situation where you don't understand this easement thing. It may get to a point where you have to seek legal advice or contact a government official in order to clarify easement and property rights information, especially if it's on your property. So easements are a big deal, especially if you're doing a physical security plan, because now you need to know what are those vulnerabilities from those easements. And then in some cases, um, you want to be a nice person, but is the easement encroaching on your privacy or encroaching on the safety? So those are things that you can create mitigations and rules in order to reduce people going onto your property without permission. Let's talk about jurisdictions, right? Most times, especially in the United States, I don't know where you're at right now, but in most jurisdictions, even around the world, there's some type of local government entity that retains the data and the information and logs with reference to property ownership, and bylaws when it comes to what is private property and what is public property. Um, when you're performing your physical security assessment, you need to have all those laws. You need to have everything that pertains to that property that you're performing the assessment to. So then that way, when you do your implementations and you look at your intangibles when it comes to what you're going to do as far as physical security enhancements or recommendations, that you understand what laws apply and what jurisdictions they fall under. And in some cases, it's good to know who, like for instance, in the United States, who's the code enforcement or who are the county officials that manage the land. So, like for instance, you got property there, but there's public lands, close to or around, or you have an easement through public lands to get to your property. All this information is very important. You need to know the people in those jurisdictions, so then that way, if you do make or intend on making any implementations, that you keep them in mind and you're aware of all the rules and all the customs and the cultures that are involved with reference to physical security plans and implementation. So we're going to talk more in detail about property lines. Okay, sometimes property lines can be very vague, um, unless you have a document that tells you exactly what the lines are, like what the grid coordinates are and what the block is. In some cases, you actually have to go out and seek some kind of professional um, assessment when it comes to like a survey of the land. uh, it can go, like for instance, if it's land it's out in the open, most times it's not necessarily very important. But when you're now start looking at it in a physical security point of view, when you're looking at it as that you're going to do implementations, you're going to do recommendations for physical security purposes, you really need to know what your limits are. And you also need to know, like for instance, like you're going to implement physical security, what your standoff as far as your space from that property line is going to be, so it doesn't encroach on another property. And you need to know exactly how the lines are defined with reference to, is there bodies of water, or is there a highway or a road. All these things need to be on your physical security plan. And again, when you start gathering records and information, you will definitely have an opportunity to draw it out. And now what I would do, literally, I would go to some type of technology like Google, or even do just a map, a handwritten map, and that way it helps you put into your physical security plan what is your property lines and how you intend on doing your implementations based on those lines. So, like for instance, you don't install physical security um, methods and technology right on the property line. We always do what they call as a standoff. You want space. You don't want it to encroach onto other property, and also you don't want other property or other traffic to encroach on your physical security. So these are things that we have to think about, and always keep that in mind, that your property lines are must be very specific and detailed with reference to having a map and having that drawn onto your physical security plan. So we're talking about access, right? Access. Who who do you want on your property, right? So do you want your property to be closed off, where um, I have different types of property that I own? Some are closed off and access is limited to, like for instance, a home, to family members or to visitors, right? Um, you want to define that in your physical security plan. If you have a large property and it's open space, you want to define at the property, near the property line, what is your property and who is invited. Like for instance, you're not inviting trespassers, people that you did not intend on coming onto your property, that have no business there. You would more than likely create a plan in your physical security plan as far as who's allowed and what times are allowed, what they're allowed to do there, and have a descriptive plan as far as how you will manage that property. A lot of organizations like real estate, they'll have it. They'll have something like that, especially when they manage large properties with multiple home units. They'll have some type of access or access control when it comes to specific areas. Um, Another access thing that you need to think about when you're drawing up this plan and you're performing this audit is um, your critical infrastructure, your things that are going on your property that that need to be protected. So then that way, if they get tampered with, they don't, affect either an environmental issue when it comes to your living environment, or they affect, a process, a business process, and or your organization. So access is a big deal, and when we start looking at access, you need to know, exactly where the access is going to be. Is it going to be off of one road? What's the name of that road? Where's the property line? Where's the standoff? Where do you intend to access the visitors access one area, and people that work there or people that are family or known associates are accessing through another area? Those things always have to be assessed properly, and it's a part of this plan, right? It's a part of your audit to figure out, if there's any vulnerabilities in that access. So that's access control and access. So we're back, kind of touching a little bit back on, like easements, but sometimes there's agreements, right? Sometimes people have property, like for instance, parking lots, or they have areas um, that they share the use with. Maybe some unwritten rule or unwritten agreement, which is not a best practice, but it has been done over time. Maybe you purchased a property and now you're inheriting some of these things that people are telling you that were things that the former owner did. Like for instance, allowing them to park their their equipment onto your property, temporarily or whatever it may be. You have to keep those things in mind. Like for instance, I have a property in one of these locations, and that property was commonly used by the local county, the sheriff's office, and they would park equipment or temporarily park to perform law enforcement functions in the parking area. And I'm okay with it, right? But at the same point, there has to be some agreements. Things have to be put in writing, so then that way it reduces, it takes away liability. Because if there was the adage of, if it wasn't written, it didn't happen. They can always say, hey, this person's always it's always been this way, and it's an unwritten agreement. But at the same point, who's liable for any of that activity? Who's liable if, like, for instance, a piece of equipment that belongs to a neighbor spills some type of chemical or fuel or oil or whatever it may be, and who's responsible for the cleanup? And these are things that we have to think about. You have to think about those agreements. When I was overseas in another country, uh, we're on a base. The base, yes, the base is managed by United States, but the owners are the country, right? That we're actually there as we're invited there to operate. So there's things that there are expectations or agreements that, when you're operating a base in the military in another country, that based on those agreements, that's how you're going to operate or manage that land. And I could see many times that, the country would come and do inspections on the land and make sure that there was no concerns with reference to violating those agreements. So keep that in mind. Agreements are very important. And when you're performing your audit, your self audit, and you're actually starting to look at all these things that are going on your property, you maybe start thinking about, hey, you know what? These are the standard practices or things that we have been doing it for a long time, but we don't have agreements in place. Maybe it's time to bring those stakeholders to the table so we can draw up an agreement in order to establish, what is or is not allowed when they're operating on your property. So as we touch about, like, agreements and private property, it's all kind of coming together to placarding and signs. Um, some places I've worked at in my past, I worked in private communities, very nice private communities, and sometimes signs are very ugly. And so you don't want to have a lot of signs. But here's my thought: is in some cases signs are necessary. So, like for instance, some land I own, um, there's issues with reference to trespassing. The trespassing may not be malicious; it might not be intentional, but because there's no signs and they don't see who the owner is and they don't see what the rules are on a sign, people tend to do uh, what they do. You know, if they see that property and they see that there's no signs, there's no rules, then they apply their own rules. You know, they kind of make up things as they go. So signs are very important in areas that where you don't want you want to maintain the beautification of the area. Signs can be applied in a way that um, it doesn't look so bad. I mean, there's ways of putting signs out there, like for instance, you know, referring to specific rules, websites, or information with reference to, hey, this is our property. Go to this website. These are the rules. Or, you know, unless you're a visitor, you know, do not trespass. In some states, you actually have to put a state law onto the sign in order for it to be enforceable. So these are all things you need to think about when you do your physical security assessment. When you're doing that audit, that self audit, you're looking around and you're looking where are the obvious places that one you look at historical, and then just the obvious places where a person can walk and unknowingly, you know, trespass or unknowingly do something because they are not aware that that's your property and that these are your expectations, and or you're referring to a specific law that you don't want them to violate. So now we're talking about signs and visitors and trespass and all this stuff. But the visitor part is very important. Um, you have to have a plan, and in your plan, in your when you perform your self audit, is there any documentation with reference to the commonality of rules that apply to visitors? The visitors are only allowed to do A through Z or A through B instead of A through Z. That they're not allowed to enter certain areas of your property. That they're only there to perform a specific function or business. That they must be escorted. You know, these are all very important things, and so I would always recommend that when you perform a implementation of physical security, that you have something in writing with reference to what your expectation of visitors are. When it comes to like the family environment at home, a lot of that stuff, I think people do it unknowingly. They subconsciously have these conversations with neighbors and friends, and they know what their expectations are. And there's certain thresholds that people do not trespass on. They don't um, infringe on. But in situations when it's a piece of private property or property that's how you say ownership or being managed, it's very important to have the visitor rules, like rules of conduct, on file, and the visitors are aware of it. That you give them something to sign and say, "Hey, these are our expectations when you're on our property, and these are the things that you need to do in order to comply with those expectations." Don't just expect people to just be, you know, or think or mind read. You want them to, you know, read a piece of paper, or you, if they can't read or they have some type of disability, that you can, you know, interact with them so they understand what the rules are. So here's a short quiz, just 3 items. So question number one, you know, how do you identify property, right? So I mean, I'm asking you, you tell me, how do you identify a piece of property? Question two, um, how does the design of the property support the identification? Like what things, like for instance, what is it that will help you identify that property? And question three, what are the best practices in identification of that property. So well, now, in conclusion to this, you will think about, you know, some of those key learning objectives with reference to performing your self audit. If you can answer those questions, more than likely, when you're performing your self audit, you will be able to provide very descriptive and detailed information with reference to, you know, um, what the rules are as they apply to what the recommendations are in order to make that piece of property more secure, or have all the proper implementations so then people behave a certain way so it's safe and secure when people are on that property. Well, thank you for watching this module, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me in the email below. I think that this is a great opportunity for you to understand and perform your self audit. This is only one module of many in a series of modules that will cover on performing your self audits when it comes to physical security, and on what we're covering is private property, but it does fall within the categories of a physical security level 3, under, you know, the federal standards for the Department of Homeland Security, ISC, the ISC, the committee that makes recommendations for physical security of government buildings.